Hello. As we round down to the end of Part 2, and the US rounds down its sanity to the upcoming election, I thought it would be nice, once more, to focus on something a little simpler. I mentioned in Part 1 logistics as a factor of realism, but also as a limiter in regards to any mecha in general, just dealing with existing in the real world. So I thought it would be nice once more to focus on something that is often ignored, because really, it adds this nice aspect to mecha stories in general. Honestly, if there's something in media nuanced and ignored, but which provides something really cool or useful, then I suppose at this point I'm the friggin' patron saint of those things, because I notice them and I appreciate them a lot. Going back to 0079, the very first Gundam, we can see this just pretty much straight up. One of the neatest little details that really grounds things in that series. Like, fundamentally, you have these big rainbow robots jumping around, same as a ton of other shows at the time. But when you see a character like Char openly mention something like the loss of just a few Zaku's being pretty bad, it adds this weight. This thing has value. Humans made it, and it's important, but it's also finite. Losing a Zaku is like losing a fighter jet or an expensive tank. It's a big hit and not one taken lightly. Later on, there's also the episode where they have to meet up with a resupply ship to transfer new suits. It's like, look at that. That is something that Gundam kind of slowly lost over time, sadly. Meeting a resupply ship and, having to get these supplies and all this provisions, it's really neat. I always kind of savored these moments when they would show up. In Stardust Memory, there's just one shot of, various suits getting transferred, or say the Nui Zeal getting serviced, and it's just really cool. Just a tiny little thing. I'm glad that in the later series like Thunderbolt, this kind of reappeared, really, and that these ships got a more central focus in the plot. Even by the end of 0079 itself, it's clear that if 6,000 Zaku's make Aobaoku cooler, then the story will have 6,000 Zaku's. Story needs to take precedent. But the fact that it was mentioned at least at some point is still pretty neat. By the time of Victory, it's almost played for laughs how often Uso uses extra Gundam parts to do some, creative ass pulls. It's like, man, we cannot get rid of all these damn Victory Gundam parts. Even just a year later, in almost an absurdist way, there came Idion. The fact that the Idion's, at least one of its most devastating attacks, its all-range missile barrage, needs to have its missiles manually reloaded. Once more, it's such a small detail, but it's there. It's used, not just for logistical realism, but almost as a way of desperation. Even with its absurd power, the Idion simply can't keep fighting. It can't win against the Buff Clan. In spite of its godly destructive output, it is still bound by certain rules and limitations. Well, at least until they let the damn baby in the robot. Moving on, I want to make a particular note of Evangelion's approach. Gainax already had a really good track record when combining more fantastical and realistic aspects. In particular, the angels that have this really big destructive power, but then when are killed, usually most of them just really blow up. Some of them, however, kind of hang around, and I think this is really kind of funny. It's a fun subversion towards that specific kind of logistical realism. So okay, think of it like this. In the classic Ultraman and Tokusatsu, bad guys explode. Now they do this for a few big symbolic reasons, really. One, it's just a really cool way to end a fight. It's not a casual death, but a tremendous earth-shattering blast. Kind of like that one time California blew up that beached whale corpse. Two, it's kind of symbolically like the release of the huge energy of the creature. Like it was big, it had a big soul filled with power, and now it's gotta go someplace, so it explodes. But most important to us, as a kid, it helps you believe in Ultraman. Why are there no big monster bodies in the real world? Oh, because clearly they explode. See, no problem. No mess to clean up. They go poof. But see, here we return to Evangelion. And really, it's kind of the irony of the inversion of that. After the titanic battle with Ramiel, unlike the other angels, it doesn't explode. It just sort of crashes into the city. And we have just this one fun shot. Dozens of cranes having to meticulously dissect and remove this giant carcass. Thousands of tons of weird Ultraman kaiju crystal flesh that needs to be cut up and dealt with. Eva is filled with these kinds of fun logistical jokes. These inherently insane concepts brought down and just really made grounded. Made to feel realistic via the implications of its setup. Another thing to use this was Pacific Rim. Once more, how do you dispose of these rotting, volatile giant monsters? It's just a few shots in the intro, but how cool is it? And I love Ron Perlman's character. Like, yeah, of course, every monster is carrying kilotons of weird, special monster organs and blood. Of course, there would be a black market for that kind of thing. If Chinese traditional medicine users suck the gallbladder fluids out of moon bears to cure their erectile dysfunction or whatever, then of course, I don't know, maybe they'd try the same with King Ghidorah's teeth or whatnot. And while we were talking about it, Pacific Rim also has the Jaegers. Deploying the Jaegers, much like the Evas, is an expensive effort. It's one of the biggest reasons behind the pressure to shut down the Jaeger program. It's the cost. The idea is that, much like aircraft carriers, nations could only ever afford a handful of these specialized and costly machines, requiring dedicated reactors and construction facilities, maintenance zones like the Shatter Dome, and so on. It's something kind of lost in the second Pacific Rim movie when you just have casual, mass-produced Jaegers. It no longer holds any special quality, really. Focusing back on the Evangelions themselves, there's another little detail that I love. It's the implications of just this one offhanded thing. Basically, in the rebuilds, there's a thing that's mentioned that's called the Vatican Treaty, about countries not being allowed to use or deploy more than 3 Evangelion units, because of their destructive potential. The overseeing body of this is the International Project Evangelion Association, and here it's clearly kind of based on the International Atomic Energy Association, which is the association which monitors the use and development of nuclear power and its relationship to atomic weapons production. And I mean, come on! Isn't that just fantastic? The Evas, these big God Warrior spandex neon Ultramen. Whoa, hold on now. Gotta have the bureaucratic oversight. Gotta make sure the red tape works. Gotta report to the United Nations. Gotta follow proper protocol. Really, it's great. It's just a small detail, but once again, it's implying this whole bigger, weird logistical world backing up these machines. This whole system where, I don't know, billions of dollars of GDP is funneled into making sure the Ultraman's shoes get made good. To mention one last one, I want to go back to the series that kicked off, well, this series, which is Patlabor. It has a few great lines in its first movie that I think I really want to touch on and encapsulate a lot of this grounding. As I mentioned before, the first episode of Rebirth, Japan's economic resurgence is used in Patlabor as the cue for the scale and expansion that kickstarted labor development of the mechas in its series. In the movie, the head chief mechanic of SV2 visits an old friend in the engineering division of Shinohara Heavy Industries, the main company that manufactures the labors, the police mechs, for Patlabor. Watching the beautiful animation of the labor production lines pumping out machine after machine is something that I think is kind of amazing in and of itself. But what the engineer says is what I think really seals the deal. The origins of Shinohara Heavy Industries isn't alien technology, it's not super tech from the future. It was a truck repair shop that serviced American occupation force vehicles. Those same vehicles, which if you remember from my episode on Kunio Okawara, helped inspire the design of the Votoms, the American Army Jeeps. Here, it's the origin. Before Shinohara was even a heavy industry, like Japan, it had to continuously grow, to the point it handled first heavy machinery, then started on robotics, and finally on labors. It's very directly even further showing you, and telling you as an audience, the labor is not a machine in isolation. It was born from the same people and the same growth that rebuilt Japan as a whole after World War II. I know this was a shorter one, but I do think these little details all add up. While individually they might not seem like much, I think they really would take something away from their series if they weren't present. I think they're the core of a very special kind of realism that resonates within mecha in particular, of bringing these fantastical machines into this kind of realm of believability, by adding all these specific kinds of limitations and histories to where they came from. Next time, I'm going to talk about why Giguk is a Gomi Ningen dipshit, and how mecha as a genre is dead forever. Unless it isn't.